Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're talking about Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. My guest is Wayne Pashley, the owner and co-founder of Big Bang Sound Design, and who on Elvis is credited as re-recording mixer, sound designer, and supervising sound editor. Wayne, welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you so much, Skid. It's great to be here. Good on you.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. A warning for listeners first, today's conversation may contain spoilers for the film. Now, Wayne, I know you have had a long and rich history working with Baz Luhrmann. Tell me a little about that.
Wow. Yeah, we go actually back to Baz's first film, which was Strictly Ballroom, and which was actually fantastic because right now I noticed at the Academy Theatre Museum, they're running Strictly Ballroom either this week or next week. Yeah, where they've restored it with a 4K version. So that's great. So, my history goes back to there, and it was his first film. I remember getting quite nervous at meeting Baz because I'd just seen the movie. It was on, I think, 5 VHS tapes where the editor had sent me the movie, and I could not wait to change the tapes over. It was so engrossing and such an incredible thing. I'd never seen anything quite like it. So I kind of went into the meeting with Baz to see, if he liked me and all that stuff. And anyway, we got along like a house on fire. His energy was unbelievable, and his passion and all that, and so theatrical. And so it was kind of right up my alley. And so we started launching into the film. And one of my first sort of major sort of experiences with him was I was actually recording Loop Group, which is the crowd stuff in a controlled environment. We're in a big recording stage, and Baz turned up, and not only did he start directing the crowds, but he actually threw himself into the crowds and lent his voice to it. It was extraordinary because you've got to remember too that Baz was an actor first, so he's very, very good with actors, and his ability to get what he needs from cast members is, I reckon, was certainly one of the best I've ever worked with, And so that was a lot of fun. And, nobody knew where a film about ballroom dancing was going to land, who's it for and all that stuff. And anyway, the rest is history. And so, it goes back 30 years. Subsequently, here we are on Elvis.
Well, certainly when people think about his collection of work, the role of music and sound and how that ties in with visual language is a huge part of it. But I'd like to hear from you and your perspective, what's unique about working on Baz's projects.
Baz is a master storyteller. There's a lot of people that would say, oh, Baz Luhrmann is too much for me, blah, blah, blah. He cuts too rapidly and, one thing and another. But, honestly, he's such a risk taker. And honestly, I would say that his passion and his innovation and vision is just extraordinary. And he comes in with such love for the project. I tell you what, you've got to do your research because he takes on like enormous subject matters, and he loves a good, romance and a tragedy, very much into that. So, but it's research. So every part of the project, whether you're in, production design or costumes or, props or sound or music, you've got to make sure that you're doing it with authenticity. But also, everything has to be in harmony. That's the thing. He will expect you to be looking for the unexpected sounds as well, and to use those as transitions or creating the world where the characters reside. So, honestly, it's all about joining hip with the editorial department in post-production, certainly, and the music department, that he expects you to be as one. I'll never forget when he had a vision for, during Gatsby to have like post-production in the round. So he wanted to have if it was possible to have like a theater in the round where you had like these pieces of the pie around the stadium where you had visual effects, editing, sound, music, where he could just swing in a chair. And that concept, you know, that concept is kind of pretty out there, but it's an idea that we try to do with what the technology allows now. So sound design, music are a singular vision in all of his films. That's sort of the top of the tree. He will look for a sonic architecture that is equal to the vision. And it's an immense challenge at times, honestly, because you never want to stay on one idea either. You're constantly thinking, okay, everything's got to move a little bit like a relay race where the baton is handing to the next idea. You're weaving and woving throughout the story and what the character's emotions are doing, because honestly, you can have a reality and an authentic sort of situation, but it's all about the visceral situation. It's about the feel. And if he's feeling it and he's being emotionally driven, that's key. And that is everything you're looking for when you sign up on a Baz project.
Now, with Elvis, you have an iconic music figure, and you also have this sort of period of time that we're talking about. Sound design was clearly involved from the very beginning. Talk to me about some of the specific aspects of how that played out on this movie.
Well, Baz does write a lot of sonic ideas within the script, number one. So when I had my first meeting with him, I hadn't read the script at that stage, by the way. And he came to my studio here and we sat down and he started to pitch through the film, right? And I was like, engrossed and just going, wow. Yeah, because let me just sort of say that Elvis for me, is kind of like a full circle. I grew up loving his films, loving his music, and as a kid, I remember the day he died very, very well. And I was in high school and it was such a shock to everybody and so sad, So this sort of situation where Baz told me he was going to look at making a film after Great Gatsby, he was going to start looking into doing this as a project. I was so excited. And here we are sitting in a room and he's kind of pitching the movie. And as he's talking, and I hadn't read the script, I could see Baz mentally taking on the sonic qualities as he was speaking, because obviously he had a lot of other things to consider whilst at that part of the production. He'd written the script and dealing with all the heads of department and stuff. And all of a sudden he's talking to a sound guy. And what does it mean for Elvis? I was sort of starting to, help him along the way as he was talking, because first of all, I thought we were just taking a part of Elvis's life, just a slice of it. But no, we say, no, we're doing cradle to death. We're doing the whole deal. I couldn't believe it, how we were going to do it in 2.5 hours. So, during his speech, we started talking about the authenticity of the vehicles. We all know that Elvis loved his cars. Clearly, it was going to be about the music. What does that mean in terms of are we doing playback using Elvis Presley, or are we doing live? I'd had no idea who Austin Butler was at that time. Colonel Tom Parker was now cast with Tom Hanks. Who was Colonel Tom Parker? I knew of him, but had no idea that within the script he's going to be the unreliable narrator, as it were. And we talked about the crowds, because the crowds were paramount to the story and how that was going to affect Elvis Presley as a character. And ultimately, the question remains, was it his love for us and our love for him that ultimately killed him? That was the first step. The music, the cars, I've got to talk to the composer, which I did the following week. Elliot Wheeler, and we sat down, had lunch and talked about what he was planning. So this was the very early days. And of course, then, with all the sort of excitement towards that, then of course the pandemic hit in a big way with Tom Hanks getting sick. And at that point, we thought the film may never happen. It was shooting up in the Gold Coast in Queensland, north of Sydney. There's a border there between Queensland and New South Wales. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get up to Queensland for a period. Tom Hanks went home with Rita, and no one knew what was going to happen. And so it was literally, I think, 3 or 4 days out from shooting when this happened. And then Warner Brothers basically put a lock on all the sound stages because all the sets were built. And and honestly, if it wasn't for Austin Butler, who basically said to the studio, I'm not moving, I'm staying, I've done all this work, sort of getting into Elvis Presley spiritually and the accent and movement and everything else, that he didn't want to just throw that away. They wanted him to go back to California, but he actually stayed. And I think the fact that this film was made is a lot due to the fact that, he dug his heels in. So that was great. And of course, then we didn't know what was going to happen with Tom, because once he got well, what's his schedule going to be like, etc. So then we got into it. Tom came back, the locks came off the sound stages, and we were on. And this was the big deal. So now it was real. Now we had to start really digging into the life of Elvis Presley. I've got a wonderful crew here that I've worked with, some of them for, in fact, 30 years, more, some of them. I mean, and all of us dug deep, books about Elvis's life, biographies and things, and immersed ourselves with all the posters around our walls, and covered ourselves and got into total immersion over the period of the production. So it was a great deal of fun, I mean, I could go into specifics with meeting Austin for the first time. We did some sound tests. Now, we had this a wonderful production sound mixer, David Lee, had set up not only PA systems and everything else, but he had a 32-channel recorder. We had a very basic set built up in Queensland. We had camera there with Mandy Walker, and we had the music department. And I walked onto the stage there, met Austin for the first time. We had a Shaw 55 microphone set up, like from the 50s. So the real deal. But first of all, we wanted to check basically the technical sync. How is sync going to work through the process to the camera? And we started with playback. So Austin had an in-ear piece, and we played back a track from the music department through David Lee's rig into Austin's ears, and he basically mimed. And that in itself proved to be fantastic. Okay, done. Then we decided to go playback and record Austin live. Now, at this point, I didn't know how well he could sing. So we recorded then Austin and the playback. So we had both the ability to use Austin's vocal or Elvis's vocal. That was that. Baz turned up around lunchtime and said, okay, now I want you to go live. And I want you to bring in live musicians, bring in a double bass, bring in the drums, bring in guitarists, and we're going to go live, and we're going to see what happens. So boom, we're miking up everything. In came the musos, and he recorded, I think, Blue Suede Shoes at the time, what it was. And I honestly got to tell you, I felt like I just witnessed Elvis Presley live. It was amazing. At the end of the day, Baz came to me and said, we are going to do more live than not on this film. That changed everything.
I can imagine. Wow.
I'm sure it upped Austin's anxiety level somewhat. So that's how it all started. And then we just started going down the road. We had an incredible props department, obviously doing all the props for the sets of Gracelands and the International and all those things. But we had this musical props department that started scouring the world for all the real deal stuff. The microphones, the amps, the guitars, the basses, the drums, everything was bought in and completely authentic. With the microphones, the guys, they had them all restored. So all primo working. So from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they were all working. And that's what we recorded with. Yeah, so that's sort of the beginnings of the tale, and how we started going down the road of building it.
Wayne, I wanted to ask you about how all of that applies to a couple of specific scenes, and you really take us with you in sort of your approach and what your challenges are with that. And I think let's start with the hayride sequence, which is also Elvis's introduction.
Sure. Look, just to state Baz's overall sound design strategy, he basically said to me at that very first meeting, we are making the great American operatic tragedy. And he said, the most important thing is we have to protect Elvis's legacy. So that was that. So carrying that forward with a scene like the hayride sequence in the introduction of Elvis, it was huge. Now, the thing is with Baz, he shoots kind of, kind of traditionally in a way. Like you've got the multi-camera setups and all that stuff. So you're filming the entire performance with several times, but what you see in post is very much worked in post. He adds and sometimes goes way too far. He'll admit that, and then he'll pull back. But the editorial process is very, very iterative, and that includes the graphic guys and the and girls and all the visual effects and all that stuff. So it's this merge of all art forms, and he does throw everything at it. And look, he basically wanted this to be an audio-visual wonder. The introduction, for example, of the comic book to help truncate the story about Elvis's father writing a bad check, going to jail, the fact that he was one of a twin, he was the surviving twin, and how his mother Gladys felt that he had the heart of two men. All that stuff, that was a very late idea, because ultimately what Baz started with was a 4.5 hour cut of the film that he called the kitchen sink. So it's all in. But ultimately we had to get it down to 2.5 hours or whatever it is now, 2:40 or something. And so then he started going to the next edit, which he called the bone breaker. Now the bone breaker is the beginning of this iteration where you're constantly chasing the visual language, and as it's developing, and things like the comic book went in, split screens are starting to go in, fast cutting is happening, all that sort of stuff. So you throughout the process, chasing and developing and building. With a scene like the hayride, we had to establish Tupelo quickly, Tupelo, Mississippi, and get the feel of young Elvis's desire, and as the Colonel states, his superpower, which was music. So from the R&B that he's hearing in the Shake Shack through to the Pentecostal church and gospel, we're now looking at a fusion of music and a fusion of environments. So we're going from Tupelo to the backstage of the hayride where he's nervous and having to go on stage. So we're building. And of course, his first performance. One of the big things that was going to be revealed here is the love of the audience, and primarily the women and the sex, because that was the beginning of something very, very special in the world, not only of music, but in the cultural revolution. No one had ever seen anything quite like it. You had this kind of somewhat androgynous figure turn up in the South who was wearing mascara and a pink suit in conservative South, where they're used to country music at the hayride, and all of a sudden this guy comes on board. Sonically, the screaming was really, really important, and the build of the energy and the hunger of these women and the men, for this guy. What happened there was 500 extras. And out of those 500s, Baz plucked out some of the best screamers. Now they went to class, and they were called the Scream Queens, and they learned how to scream like for several days. Learned how to scream, keep up the energy, and not blow their voices. And that's actually a challenge in itself, I've got to tell you. And with screams, we kind of dug around in our libraries, after, we've got lots of libraries that we've built and recorded over the years. A sexual scream for Elvis Presley is not a scream that you would just get out of a library, because they tend to be just like horrific or horror sort of based. So that build of that screaming and within the musical infrastructure was really important, and the weaving of that and building that energy. Plus, you've got the voiceover of Colonel Tom Parker, and then the musical infrastructure, taking it from a 50s feel into a modern feel, where young audiences who are watching it can get a feeling of what it might have been like for those people in the 50s. That gives a derivative for now that allows a younger audience to sort of take it on and see how extraordinary Elvis Presley really was. So that was a gigantic one of the biggest. And of course, we had to record all the gospel church parishioners as well. They are singing "Come Fly Away." The "Come Fly Away" theme was pretty big in the whole film, actually, because it was kind of thematically what it was about, like Elvis flying away, to become a superstar, and then wanting to fly away and have peace in his life. It was a bit of an overall theme.
As you've described it, Wayne, that hayride sequence is really trying to accomplish a lot. And then through sound to all these various aspects, the introduction, his place in history. Another scene that strikes me interesting from a sound perspective, and maybe it's a little more focused and a little more intense, is the Rustwood sequence, where Elvis is singing Trouble, and we're talking about segregation, and there's police. And talk to me more about how that came together.
Well, that was, again, the whole scene was shot pretty well regular. We had, again, about 600 crowd. Addition of the Vice Squad came quite late. In fact, Baz did pickup shoots of those, officials with their cameras and things, because at the end of the day, it was about the fear from the Colonel's perspective, and would Elvis play ball? From the threat that he's now been discovered, the Colonel's been discovered as an alien, and if you don't control your client, we are going to throw him in jail because of the segregation laws being, not adhered to. So it became the first real political situation before Elvis got drafted off to Germany. So basically, the focus was the song. It was Trouble. It was Austin performing live. It was him singing, the whole thing. The crowds had to be huge, yet not, as Baz said, he kept saying, we don't want to get like overcrowded all the time, So that was a bit of a shape thing that was happening there all the time. But of course, now there's the introduction of the Vice Squad and the dangers that are now involved in this riotous crowd. That scene actually was going to have the stage collapse as well. At the end, it did, because it was actually a real concert in Canada in Elvis's time, where the stage did collapse through rioting teenagers. And of course, you had the segregation lines being crossed. So crowd-wise, we had recorded all the crowds, authentically from the South and all that sort of thing. And then when the music sort of turns into the dangers of it, we were in lockstep with the music department. So from all the black and white shots, the cameras, the dangers and all that sort of stuff that we were building to was once again, heavily designed over many months as it built, and the edit kept changing. The scene came down in length as well to push the energy through, because it was quite long at one point. Yeah, another major undertaking, but mainly looking through it from the lens of the Colonel with this one, sort of trying to make that story work at that time. What we did also, with Baz's style, having to cut down a 4.5-hour film to 2.5, he had to truncate all these sequences. What he was doing, he termed the phrase poetic glue, and using everything at his disposal, from fast editing through graphics, through wipes and all that sort of thing, musical transitions, sound transitions, to keep the energy, keep it pushing forward. He asked us to start looking at a way of making the montage heavy narrative work in a sound design sense. So what we did was we took the poetic glue aspect, and now we coined the phrase sonic glue. What we did there was we took real quotes, real commentary, real headlines, and recorded cast members recording real life quotes. With that, we then poured that into the sound design, into the backgrounds or the atmospherics of the room. They're swirling and they're transitional through all the heavy narrative areas. So you don't necessarily hear every line, but the commentary is based on the period of time and the authentic sort of headlines and commentary of the time. So with that, it really helped, I think, because it helped push through all the transitions as they were going forward and basically setting a political tone, for each of the narrative beats throughout the film. So they're kind of everywhere from the very beginning, as we start in the 90s with the Colonel having had a heart attack and him coming on and revealing himself as he was now on a morphine trip, to try to tell us that he didn't kill Elvis Presley. But within that infrastructure, you'll hear voices, from biographies of Colonel Tom Parker and headlines and things basically saying that this is the man that killed Elvis Presley. So it's going against everything that he was saying in order to increase the drama and increase the anxiety that he was feeling.
Well, it's a film I enjoyed when I saw it. I'm going to look forward to listening to it again. Wayne, great having you here. We're going to call it a wrap, but thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Skid. I really appreciate you inviting me on. It's fantastic. Good on you.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Wayne, where are we going to hear your work next?
Right now, believe it or not, I'm actually working on another Baz Luhrmann project. He's taken the film Australia with Hugh Jackman and Nicole Kidman. So we've dug it out of archives, and Baz has turned it into a 6-part miniseries that will be screening on Hulu. All the stuff that was once in the film is now in. And the new 6-part miniseries, it is called Faraway Downs.
Wayne, I will watch for that. Let me put some closing credits in here. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcast and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.